Hello guys, today we'll be connecting an Angular application to a WordPress API. As you can see on the browser, we have a list of blog posts which we are getting from the WordPress API in JSON format. The data is coming from my blog, thecodeangle.com. And in this Angular application, what we're able to do is to get the blog posts, and then when I click on read more, it takes me to more details about that particular blog post through the use of the post ID. Quickly heading to the WordPress documentation. As you can see, if you head to developer.wordpress.org/rest-api, you get a full overview of how the WordPress API works. With the API, you're able to create CRUD functionalities as well as authentication and authorization on your application. By default, WordPress is built on the PHP programming language, but through the use of the WordPress REST API, you are able to integrate it using other languages like JavaScript, as well as JavaScript frameworks and libraries like React, Angular, Vue, Svelte, and the likes. So, a quick overview of what we'll be learning today includes consuming the WordPress REST API, implementing route parameters in Angular, implementation of loader, as well as global error handling. So if you are still new to Angular, this tutorial provides a perfect opportunity for you to learn how to create some of these functionalities. So without wasting further time, let's head right into it. And please do not forget to like as well as subscribe to my videos so I can keep creating more awesome content on this YouTube channel. The first thing we're going to do is to set up our Angular application by running the command ng new and then the name of our WordPress application. I called mine ng-WordPress. I already did that, so I don't need to run the application again, and I already opened it in my Visual Studio Code. So with that implemented, we need to generate two components, and to do that we need to use the command ng generate component. I'm going to call the first component posts. We're going to create two components. This is because the first component is for us to get the excerpt of the blog, and then the second component will help us to display the full details of the blog. So let me create posts, and then once this is generated, the next component I'll be creating will be called single posts. So let me clear that off and then type single dash post and then press enter. While this is implementing, I would like to head back to the browser and then head straight to the documentation of the WordPress API, and I would like to show us the two APIs we'll be working with today. So on the sidebar here, if I extend under the endpoint reference, you can see we have posts over here. So when I click on posts, it takes us straight to the API for the posts. So let me scroll down. As you can see here, this is the URL we'll be using. What they have here by default is https:/example.com/wp-json/wp version 2/post. When we are going to implement our Angular application, we'll be replacing the URL with the URL of our blog, which is thecodeangle.com. So that allows us to get all the posts in that particular blog. Also, we need to get the post ID and the URL for that. We can see when we scroll down at the end of the post, we're going to have the ID of that particular post. That will give us the details of that every single blog post. So those are the two APIs we'll be working with. With that in mind, let's head back to our Angular component. So I open the SRC folder, the app folder, as well as the post folder. I also open the HTML, post.components.html. I clear this off, and then I copy a snippet of the HTML we'll be using, paste it in, as well as the CSS. We paste that in as well. For us to be able to see this on the browser, we need to set up our routing. Angular routing usually come in form of an object. So what we're going to have here is path, and then this will be code for the post component, and then we'll bring in the component. Then the next component we need to bring in is a single post component. So I'm going to have path. So we'll call this posts / ID, because this is going to be a single post and it's going to have a route parameter. I need to specify the ID part of the URL. So I type in the component and bring in it as well. So that will be called single post component. As you can see, we now have both components imported into our file. And the final URL I want is a redirect URL, in case once we get to the page, I want that to be like the landing page of the application. So what I'll have here is 2 wildcards, and then I type in the redirect to, we want to redirect to posts, and then we call path match full for us to avoid any form of error. With that done, one final thing I want us to do before testing this in the browser is head to our app components.html file. By default, we have a boilerplate generated for us, so let me clear this off. And then the only thing we're going to have in this file is the router-outlet, because we enabled routing for this application. So let me save all the files, head straight to the terminal and run ng serve. Now our app has compiled successfully. Let me head over to the browser and then type in localhost 4200. As you can see, we get redirected to the post just as we specified in our app routing file. So this kind of look nice. The HTML is coming from the post.component.html file. We didn't really do much here. I don't want to spend too much time on the design, but you have access to this code on GitHub on the description of this YouTube video. So I'll close the post component.css as well as the app component.html. So the next thing we're going to do now is to set up our blog service. And to do that, I'll have to stop this terminal once again and then generate the service file by running ng generate service, and we're going to call that service blog. While that is generating, let's import some requirements in the app module file. In this file, we need to bring in some things that will enable our service to work properly. In the providers, I'm going to bring in blog service, which is currently being generated for us in the terminal, as well as the HTTP client module that will be in the import array. So under the app routing module, I'm going to type in HTTP client module. Then we import the client module. So for now, this is what we need to do in our app module.ts file. We may need to come back here much later in the video. So let me save this and head back to our blog service file. So the first thing we need to do in this file is to create a URL. So just under the export class, I'm going to type in private keywords and then the name of our URL. Let me close this blog URL, and that will be equals to the URL of our blog where we want to get all the details of the blog post. So that's decodeangle.com. So I'll copy that, head back to my file and paste that in. So we need to create two functions, one to get the posts and one to get single posts. So the first one, let's call that get posts, and we open a bracket, and inside of this bracket we create a variable. So we say const URL is equals to open a backtick, and then inside of the backtick we make reference to the variable we created, which is this.blog, to get the blog URL. Then / we need to head over to the documentation of the WordPress Rest API and then grab our endpoints, which is wp-json / wp v2/posts. So I'll paste that in here. Now our endpoint is set, so let's return this. So I'll type in return this, we need to inject our HTTP clients and we need to bring it in. We haven't done that in this video. So quickly in the constructor, I'm going to make use of the private keyword and then type in HTTP and then bring in the HTTP client and as well as inject it into this project. So we can now return by saying this dot HTTP by making use of the HTTP client reference, and then this is going to be a get request. So type in dot get. It takes in the URL which we want to consume, and then that's all we need to do for now. And then for the get single posts, so let me also create that. Let me duplicate this. So for the get single post, the endpoint is different, so we still add documentation and then we grab the endpoints we have over here, paste it in, and then the ID is going to be in backticks because it's going to be unique, and this will take in an argument of ID also, and we can give it a type of any. So we've set up the functions for our two APIs. So the first one we're implementing is the post component. So I head over to the post component.cs file, and inside of this file we need to import the block service. So to do that, I can just start from the constructor by creating a keyword private block service, and then we bring in the block service. Then what we need to do next is to consume our REST API. So we create another function, but before we do that, let me get rid of this void, and then we can say get post, open a bracket, and inside of this bracket we can say this dot block service dot make reference to the get post function we created in our block service, which is this. And then inside the block service, inside the get post, we can now subscribe to this because it returns a promise. And then for us to get the data, we can just say data, and then we have an arrow function. So for us to know the kind of data we are getting, we can log this to the console. So I will just say console.log data. So let me save this. Let me check if our server is running. It's not. Let me start it up once again, and then we check the browser, open the inspect console, refresh the page. Okay, we can't see the data because we didn't call the function in our engine on init. A small error on my part, so we need to call this dot get posts for this to render on the initial page load. So I'll save this once again, head back to the browser, and let's see if we have the data. As you can see, we have the data logging out in the console, and there are 10 blog posts, each of them having its own unique object which will be appending to the browser. So we've done like half of the work we need to do. So we have some key like dates, comments, format, status, and so much more, but we'll be working with just 3 or 4 of each of these keys. So let me move this to the side and head back to the post component ts file. So for us to append this to the page, we need to create a global variable. So I'm going to call this blog post, and I'll assign it a type of any. So once that is done, I can say this dot blog post is equals to data. Now in our component HTML file, we'll need to loop through the data, and where we should do this is in the section, the blog section part of the page. So this section part of the page, so I can make use of the ng4 to iterate over the array of objects. So I can say ng4 is equals to, open a quote, let posts of blog posts. The blog post is the variable we created here, and then we appended data we are getting from the blog post service. So now with this, we should be able to display the data dynamically. To do that, I'm going to open the curly brace bracket, and then we can say posts dot, this is the title, so I can say title. Let's check the terminal once more to be sure we know what we are doing. So we have a title here which I want to show. So it will be post.title.rendered. So I copy that, post.title.rendered. For the body of the post, I can clear this off and then open the curly bracket again. So I can say post dot. Let's check. I think there's an excerpt object among. Yes, this shows just a brief overview of the blog post. So this is what we're going to be making use of. So I can say post dot excerpt dot rendered, and let's save and see how this looks. As you can see from what we have here, it's returning some set of HTML. I think that's what's bringing from the WordPress object. It's returning HTML. We don't want to display HTML to the users on the page. So to do this, we need to do some form of binding. So we need to bind the object to what we call some HTML attributes. So I'm going to clear this. Instead of making use of the curly brackets, we're going to bind this to the inner HTML. So I'll say inner HTML, and that would be is equals to our result. And I think I should also do that for the header, the title as well. So I'm going to cut this off, clear this off, and then bind it to the inner HTML and paste that in. So let's save and see if there's any change. So you see, we now have it in text format, no HTML code in the page, which is perfect. Another thing I want to do is to limit the amount of characters in the excerpt. So I can just make use of the pipe and then slice it. So by 400, so slice, start from the very first word and then render 400 words to the page. So that looks nice. One thing we want to make dynamic as well is the date. What we can do is to clear this off, and then the date does not render in HTML, so we don't have any issue with that. So we can say post dot date, and then we want the date to render as short. This is like an Angular directive, so I'm gonna call this short. There are so many ways you could render the dates, but I think this is perfectly fine for us. So once I do that and I refresh, you see the date is rendered in this format. I think that's all the data we need to render in this page. One thing I would like to do next is to handle our global error handling. So for instance, let's say we have a wrong URL, and let's test this out by removing the T in the URL. Let me save, head back to the browser and inspect. We don't have a way of handling this right now, so because of this we can't render the error to the page. So let's do that now. So quickly heading over to the blog service, we need to bring in some things. So the first thing we need to bring in is the HTTP error response. So I'll type in HTTP error response. We also need to bring in observable observer as well as catch error. So to do that, I type in import observable observer from RxJS. Now that we've brought in the required things to set up our error, I'm going to append our URL to a pipe. So for the get post, I'm going to type in .pipe and then make reference to the catch error. So say catch error, and then it takes in an argument. So we haven't created the arguments yet, so I'll just call this dot error handler. So let's create our error handler. So don't spell this correctly. So just below the get single posts, I'm gonna create a new function called this dot error handler. So the error handler is going to take in an argument of error, which is appended to the HTTP error response, and then we need to return an observable. So return new observable. Then it takes in an argument of observer, which we also brought into the application, and then we append the observer to the type of any. So I'm gonna get rid of this observable here, and then we can say observer dot error, and it takes in error. So with this, we're able to handle our error in our component. So I also need to probably append this to our get single post, even though we have not gotten there yet. So let me just copy this and then paste it in this service. Now, to be sure this works properly, we need to implement it in our post component. So in this post component, we need to create a variable. So this variable, we can call it error message, error message, and then give it a type of any. I'll get rid of this console for now. So in our function over here, what we can do is we can try to access the error by creating an error function, anonymous function. So we can say this. Let's console log the error. Let's see if we're able to get the error in our console. Remember, we tampered with the URL. It's not properly spelled. So let's save. As you can see, post components on line 24, we are returning the HTTP error response, and inside of there we get some objects like error.message. This says no route was found, matching the URL and request method. So we can append this to the page in so that we have a good user experience. So quickly to do that, what I'll do is to say this dot error message is equals to error dot message, and then in our post component we can just probably put it just below the blog post. So I can just say open a span tag, and inside of the span tag call the error message keyword, and then save. So as you can see, we have the error displayed on the browser, but I want this to be in red, so I can just give it a style. It's equals to color red. Save once again, get rid of the console to see how this displays, so the user is able to know, okay, we have an error on the page. Now that that's done, I'll readjust the URL, and then what we need to do next is to set up a loader on the page. So the loader we use is called ngx spinner. So we need to install this. So ngx spinner. So this is the documentation of ngx spinner, and we can copy this, stop the server, and then install it into the application. While this is installing, we can go through documentation to see how this is being set up. So to get rid of some errors, we need to bring in the custom error schema. So let me quickly do that. That will be done in our app module file. So in the app module file, we can bring it in. It's gonna be inside the Angular core, and then we need to inject it as a schema. And just be down here. Then in our components file, we need to also bring it in. So I'm going to copy this, head to our post component CS file, import the ngx spinner, inject it as a service in our constructor. Then we need to call the show and hide for the spinner. So when the page is loading and we're about to get the data, we need to show it. But once the data has been gotten, we need to hide it. So that's done through the this.spinner.show and this.spinner.hide. So we can hide it after our data has been gotten, or when we have any form of error, we can also hide it here. Then for it to now show finally on the page, we need to bring it in our HTML file. So there's a particular demo I saw and I want to work with. So let me load this out and then grab this HTML, head to the post component HTML file, and at the top of the HTML file, we can just paste it in and then save everything we've done. See if the ngx spinner has been installed, and then let's run the server once again. Our terminal has properly compiled. Let's get straight to the browser and refresh the page to see if we have our spinner working. It's not working for some weird reason. Let me inspect. Oh, I made an error somewhere. Didn't bring in the ngx spinner module, so we need to import that in our app module file. So quickly, let's do that. Let's put it just below the http client module. So ngx spinner module, copy this, inject it in our module, and then save. Let's check the browser, and our spinner is, oh, we've got an error. It says found synthetic property. I think this could be as a result of browser animations, because when I was implementing this at first, I got this error. So we need to bring in browser animation module. So to do that, I can just import that in the app module as well. Right over here, import browser animations module from Angular platform browser /animations. Then inject this also, save, head to the browser, and I believe we should be all good to go right now. Yes, as you can see, we have a nice loader. Let me refresh once more. A nice bouncing loader. Perfect. So with that done, with the errors handled, loader handled, and then blog post also handled, the final thing we need to do is to implement the get single post. And to get the single post, we need to implement some logic, and that will be in the read more on our post component.html. So inside the read more, we have a link. So Angular does not make use of the href, rather we'll make use of the router link. So router link, and inside of the router link, we can create an array because this is going to have an ID. So this is going to be in quotes. Then we open the array. So inside the array, we want to navigate to /posts and then the post ID. So we can say post.id because each post, when we check the object returned, returns an ID. So let me save this and then let's try this out. So I'm going to click on one of the blog posts, the first one. Then you see we get navigated to single post works, and then in the URL you can see the particular URL of that single post. Perfect. Now we need to implement the single post, the design for the single post. That's going to be pretty straightforward. You can just copy and paste what we did earlier in the post component. So in the post component.html, I'm going to copy everything here, head over to the single post, and then paste it in. So we don't need a read more in the single post, so I'm going to get rid of the read more. Also, what do we need to get rid of again? Because we need the title, of course. Then we don't need the excerpt. What we need is the content. So post.content.render, that contains the full content of that particular post. So I think with this we're good to go. Now we are getting errors because we haven't set up our components ts file. So the single post component ts file, we need to bring in some things. So one of them is we can copy them from the post component. So I'll copy this and paste it in. Our errors are gone. I'm going to get rid of the void. Another thing we need to do is to create the function to get the service. So get single post, and then in the engine I need to call this function this dot get single post, so it renders immediately the page loads. Then we need to also copy the function because it's going to be similar to what we did in our post components file. So I'm going to copy everything here, head over to this get single post, paste it, and make some necessary adjustments. For instance, we haven't brought in the block service, so let me quickly bring that in. So private. Let me copy that from the post components to make these things faster. So we need to inject them, import them rather, the block service as well as the ngx spinner service. Great. Now we need to do this dot block service dot get single post, and the get single post takes in a variable or an argument called id. As you can see in the service over here, it takes in an id. So we can create an id variable over here. So id, and give it a type of string. So I can say this dot id. Then instead of blog posts, I'm going to call this single post. So this dot single post is equals to data, and then we bring out the error. We are getting an error in the HTML file. Okay, we need to change this as well to single post. So I'll copy that, paste that in, and I think we can save, and let's see how it looks when we navigate to the single post component. So let me go with this article. We have an error. It says HTTP response for post slash, the ID is undefined. So let's quickly fix the ID. We have forgotten to do something very important, that's to bring in the activated routes, because without the activated routes we need to get the ID from this particular URL, and the activated route is what can help us to do that. So quickly let me import that. So import activated routes from @angular router. and then in our ng on init, because we want this to happen when the page loads. So I can just say this dot id is equals to this dot. Okay, we need to inject it as well. So in the constructor, I can just say private route activated route. So I can now say this dot route dot snapshot, because we need to take the snapshot, as well as the param map dot get. We need to get what? The id, which we specified in the URL as string. This id is what we specified in the URL when we were creating the app routing file. So we are trying to get this particular id, post slash colon id. So I think this should fix the error. We can access the error once the page loads. So let me save once more, head back to the browser and see what happens. And for some reason our post is not showing. Let me check the console. Yeah, we are looping through. We are not supposed to loop through because it's an object. It returns, single post returns an object. So we are not supposed to use ng4 to loop through. What we need to do is to make use of the ng if directive. So if ng if the single post exists, then display the data. So I'm going to get rid of this post and put single post dot title, single post dot date, single post dot content. So let's save. Maybe for the third time lucky, we'll get the blog post. uh we are getting the blog post, but we sliced the data. So let me save once more. Fantastic. Now we are able to get single blog post. It's displaying this way because we haven't bring in the css. So let me bring in the css from the post components file and bring it into the single post file. So this should look much better on the page. Awesome. So we've been able to implement the WordPress API on an Angular application. Let me go back and then try to access another blog. We also have a nice loader showing on the page. So let me click on this article, and then we get transitions to the post ID of this particular article, showing more details about this article. I think this is pretty straightforward. One more thing we can do is to mess around with the URL in the blog service to see if single post error is working well. So let me get rid of the S here and save, and let's see if we have the error on the page. Yeah, we have the error on the page, and that's awesome. So I'm gonna undo that. So that's it, guys, for this tutorial. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comment section below. I'll be sure to answer. So in my future videos, I would see if I can add on to this particular application by seeing how we can integrate functionalities for creating a new post, as well as updating and deleting a particular post. But for now, what I want to do in my next tutorial is to show you how we can host this particular Angular application on the Google Cloud platform for free. So be on the lookout for that one. And if you like this video, do not forget to like as well as subscribe, and also turn on the notification bell for when that tutorial comes out. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon.